The moment the last handful of dirt hit my mother's coffin, I felt something inside me shatter. The priest mumbled his final words, the wind carried the scent of fresh earth, and mourners slowly began to drift away, offering me those hollow words of comfort that never actually comfort anyone. I'm so sorry for your loss. If there's anything you need, please let me know. She was a wonderful woman. I nodded mechanically, shaking hands, hugging relatives, all while the weight of grief pressed down on my chest like a stone. My mother, the woman who had raised me alone after my father passed, who had worked herself to the bone to make sure I had everything I needed, was gone. I was alone in the world. Or at least, I thought I had Vanessa. She stood a few feet away, perfectly composed in her sleek black dress, not a tear in sight. She looked like she was attending a corporate event rather than her mother-in-law's funeral. Her expression was one of polite sorrow, but I knew that look. It was the same one she wore in board meetings when she was pretending to care about some underprivileged mother's sob story. I had been too drained to question it then, too consumed by my own grief to see the cracks forming right in front of me. After everyone had left, I sat there by my mother's grave, staring at the headstone, unable to move. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when I finally made it home, my heart felt as empty as the house itself. Mom's things were still in boxes in the guest room. I couldn't bring myself to sort through them yet. I thought Vanessa would be there to help, to be the support I desperately needed. But she was already packing. I walked into the bedroom to find her suitcase open on the bed, her clothes folded neatly inside. She didn't look up when she heard me enter, just kept moving, her hands swift and precise, as if she had rehearsed this moment over and over again. Going somewhere? My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She sighed, finally turning to face me. There wasn't an ounce of guilt in her eyes, only mild irritation, like she was annoyed that I had walked in before she could finish. Robert, she said smoothly, I think it's time we stop pretending. My stomach clenched. Pretending? She zipped up the suitcase, standing up straight. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. Then, she tilted her head slightly and said the words that would change everything. I have another family. I'm leaving. At first, I thought I had misheard her. The words didn't make sense. My mind refused to process them. What? I finally managed. She let out a small sigh, the kind someone gives when they have to explain something tedious. I didn't want to do this right now, Robert. I know you're going through a lot, but the truth is, I've been planning this for a long time. She motioned vaguely toward the closet. I was going to wait until after the funeral, but honestly, there's no point in dragging it out. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my brain struggling to keep up. Another family? The words tasted foreign in my mouth. She nodded, her lips curving into something that might have been a smirk if I didn't know better. Yes, Dominic and I have been together for years. We have a home together, a life. And now it's time for me to be with them. Them. Not just Dominic. A family. Something inside me cracked. Not just from the betrayal, but from the sheer audacity of it. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't regretful. She was standing there, in our bedroom, packing her things like it was just another Tuesday, telling me that the life we had built together was nothing more than a temporary arrangement for her. I felt my hands clench into fists, but I forced myself to take a slow breath. Exploding wouldn't change anything. She wasn't done talking. I'll give you some time to process, she continued, zipping up the last compartment of her suitcase. But I assume you'll want to get the divorce started soon. We don't have to make this messy, Robert. Let's just be adults about it. Adults. She really thought this was going to be simple. She thought she had it all figured out. I took a step forward, forcing myself to keep my voice even. And you just expected me to be okay with this? To let you walk away after? Oh, please, she cut me off, rolling her eyes. Don't act like you didn't see this coming. You're smart, Robert. You had to have noticed. Noticed? I had spent years loving her, trusting her, building a life with her. I had been too busy taking care of my mother in her final days to notice that my wife, the woman who had vowed to stand by me, was already halfway out the door. She picked up the suitcase, adjusting the strap over her shoulder. I'll be back in a few days to get the rest of my things. You can stay here, obviously. I assume I'll still be getting my share of the inheritance, so she never got to finish that sentence. Because at that moment, I let out a laugh. A bitter, humorless laugh that made her eyes narrow. You think you're getting a share? I said, shaking my head. Something flickered across her face. Confusion. Doubt. I'm your wife, Robert. I have a legal claim. No, Vanessa. You don't. And for the first time that night, I saw it. The tiniest crack in her confidence. She didn't know. She had no idea what was coming. For the first time since she started talking, Vanessa hesitated. Her fingers tightened on the handle of her suitcase, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drawing together just slightly. It was a small thing, almost unnoticeable, but I caught it. That flicker of uncertainty. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced that she had played her cards right, that she had won. But she didn't know. She didn't know what my mother had done. What the hell are you talking about? She asked, her voice sharp now. That cold, corporate detachment was slipping. Good. I let the silence stretch between us. Let her feel it. Let the doubt creep into her mind. You really thought I wouldn't figure you out? I finally said, my voice quiet, steady. That my mother wouldn't figure you out? Her mouth opened, then closed. Just for a second. Then she scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was an idiot wasting her time. Oh, spare me the dramatics, Robert. You think you can just say something cryptic and make me doubt what I already know? I'm entitled to half of everything, including the inheritance. You don't have a choice. She was still trying to play the part. The confident, untouchable woman who always came out on top. But I could see the tension in her shoulders now. The way her breath came just a little quicker. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. My mother changed her will, Vanessa. Boom. The words landed like a gunshot. She froze, her knuckles whitening around the handle of her suitcase. That's a lie. The words came out too fast. I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Is it? Her nostrils flared slightly as she inhaled, trying to compose herself. No lawyer would let that stand. I'm your wife, Robert. You didn't get a prenup. Even if she tried to cut me out, I still have a claim. You can't just rewrite the law because you're bitter. Bitter. That word almost made me laugh again. She thought this was about emotions. That I was standing here, acting on impulse, trying to hurt her because she had betrayed me. But this wasn't about bitterness. This was about strategy. You were so focused on my mother's money, I said, watching her carefully, but you forgot one thing. I tilted my head slightly. What do I do for a living, Vanessa? Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I let the silence sink in before answering for her. I'm a real estate litigation expert. I took another step toward her. My entire career is built on making sure people don't get taken advantage of in legal disputes. And you, I gestured at her, my smile growing colder, you thought you could play me. A small exhale slipped from her lips. She was trying to keep her mask on, but I could see the cracks forming. The truth was settling in. My mother changed her will months before she passed, I continued. She saw through you. She knew exactly what you were, Vanessa. So she made sure you wouldn't see a single cent of her money. I could almost hear her heartbeat speeding up. She was processing, calculating, trying to find an angle. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice wasn't as steady as before. Even if she changed it, I can contest it. It's not that simple. I shook my head. It is that simple. My mother made sure of it. And I made sure of it. And then I twisted the knife. You want to know the best part? I said, leaning in just slightly. The will wasn't even read yet. I gave her a slow, deliberate look. Which means you just left me. You just admitted, out loud, that you've had another family this whole time. A judge is going to love hearing that when I argue for infidelity as a basis to deny you any claims. I could see it now. The moment it finally hit her. She had been so sure she was in control. So confident that she could leave on her terms, take what she wanted, and move on to her real family with no consequences. But she had overplayed her hand. Her mouth opened slightly. Closed. Opened again. Robert. Her voice was different now. Softer. A shade of something that almost sounded like concern. I stared at her. And then I laughed. It was low, bitter, humorless. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Don't you dare. You don't get to play that card." Her eyes widened. "I'm not." "You thought you were going to win, Vanessa." I cut her off, my voice calm. "You thought I was too soft to fight back, that I would just let you walk away with everything. But you made one mistake." I took another slow step forward, lowering my voice. "You underestimated me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She was thinking, spinning her web, trying to find a way out. She was about to realize there wasn't one. She swallowed, her throat working as her mind raced for a way out. I could almost hear the gears turning, the frantic calculations behind those cold, calculating eyes. For years, she had played this game, manipulating, deceiving, controlling every move with the precision of a surgeon. But now, for the first time, she had no script, no plan, no backup strategy. She started, but I raised a hand. "Save it," I said flatly. "I know you, Vanessa. I know exactly what you're about to do. You're going to shift gears, try a new angle. Maybe pretend this was all some huge misunderstanding. Maybe you'll suddenly love me again. Maybe you'll try to make me feel guilty for trapping you in a situation where you get nothing. I don't care." Her mouth snapped shut. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, lowering my voice to something only she could hear. "You spent years thinking you were outsmarting me," I said, my tone almost conversational. "Thinking I was just some oblivious, soft-hearted fool who would never fight back. You smiled at me every morning while you were building another life behind my back. You were counting down the days, weren't you?" Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. "Waiting for my mother to die. Waiting for me to be too broken to fight you. Waiting for the perfect moment to strike." I tilted my head, my smile slow and sharp. "But you forgot who you married." A flicker of something crossed her face. "Fear? No, not yet. She wasn't there yet. But she was close." I took a step back, giving her space, letting her feel it, the weight of her own choices pressing down on her. She straightened her shoulders, inhaled deeply, and forced a smirk. "Well," she said, her voice laced with artificial confidence, "I suppose we'll just have to see what the lawyer says, won't we?" There it was, the last vestige of hope, the desperate clinging to the illusion that she could still turn this around. I let her have it. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "Absolutely," I said. "We'll see." Her eyes flickered over my face, searching for something, weakness, uncertainty, a crack in my armor. She didn't find it. With a sharp inhale, she grabbed her suitcase, held her head high, and walked out. I stood there for a long moment after the door closed behind her, staring at the empty space she left behind. The silence was deafening. For years, I had loved a ghost. A woman who had smiled at me with lips that whispered lies. A woman who had shared my bed while dreaming of another man. A woman who had looked at me every day and seen nothing but a stepping stone to something better. And now? Now, she was walking straight into the trap she had set for me. I exhaled slowly, the weight of grief and betrayal settling deep in my bones. But beneath it, something else stirred. Something cold. Something quiet. I had played the fool long enough. Now, it was my turn. The day of the will reading arrived quicker than I expected. I didn't reach out to Vanessa. I didn't call, didn't text. I let her sit with her thoughts, let her marinate in uncertainty. And I knew she was stewing. I could picture it, her pacing back and forth in whatever hotel or apartment she had holed up in, her fingers gripping her phone, resisting the urge to call me and demand answers. She wouldn't, though. Her pride wouldn't let her. She would walk into that lawyer's office with the same smug confidence she had worn the night she left, convinced she still had an angle to play. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The conference room was quiet when I arrived. Just the lawyer, an older man named Harold whom my mother had trusted for decades, and a few distant relatives who didn't have much to do with our lives. Vanessa was already there, seated at the long mahogany table, her posture perfect, her nails clicking against the table as she scrolled through her phone. She didn't look up when I entered. Good. I took my seat without a word, my face unreadable. Harold cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his tone professional but warm. "As you know, we're here to go over the final will and testament of Margaret Hastings." I didn't blink at hearing my mother's name. Didn't react. I had already grieved. I had already buried her. Now, I was here to make sure her wishes were carried out exactly as she had planned. Harold shuffled a few papers before looking around the room. "Before we begin, I want to be clear that this document was amended and finalized several months before Margaret's passing. It was done under full legal review, with witnesses present, and with no signs of coercion or impairment." A slight shift in Vanessa's posture. A barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. She didn't know. Harold continued, reading through the standard legal formalities before finally getting to the part that mattered. I felt Vanessa's eyes on me now. She was waiting for it. The payout. The moment her name would be called, and she would walk away with a significant cut of my mother's estate. Harold adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat as he continued reading. "To my beloved son, Robert Hastings, I leave my estate, all liquid assets, and my shares in Hastings Realty." Silence. Vanessa sat up straighter. That was everything. Harold turned the page, his voice steady. "To my extended family, I leave the sum of $25,000 to be distributed accordingly." A few nods around the table. Someone murmured their thanks. Then, Harold flipped to the final page. "And to my daughter-in-law, Vanessa Hastings." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, her chin tilting up, bracing for the number. Harold exhaled. "I leave nothing." The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time since I had met her, Vanessa was speechless. Her body went completely still, her grip tightening around the arms of the chair as if steadying herself from an invisible blow. I didn't move, didn't look at her. I just waited. She let out a short, breathless laugh. That can't be right." Harold, ever the professional, remained impassive. "It is. The document is legally binding and has been verified by the court." "No," she said, her voice rising slightly. "No, there has to be some mistake." Harold turned to the next page and slid a copy toward her. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Hastings. Your name was removed as a beneficiary months ago." Her eyes darted across the document, reading, rereading, looking for some kind of loophole. Then she turned to me, and for the first time, I met her gaze. "What the hell did you do?" she hissed. I tilted my head slightly. "I didn't do anything." Her breath came quicker now, her chest rising and falling. This was supposed to be mine. We were married. This is the..." She cut herself off, realization dawning. My mother had known. She had seen through her long before I had. She had outplayed her. I leaned back in my chair, watching as Vanessa's world crumbled in real time. She had left me, thinking she was walking away with everything. But she had walked away with nothing. And I wasn't done yet. The room felt charged, the weight of Vanessa's humiliation settling over everyone present. The relatives who had come for their small shares were watching in awkward silence, unsure whether to look away or enjoy the unexpected spectacle. Harold, ever the professional, simply folded his hands and waited. Vanessa, however, was unraveling. Her perfectly controlled demeanor cracked as she stared down at the will in front of her, her fingers gripping the paper so tightly it crinkled. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted to Harold, then back to me, then to the will again, like a trapped animal searching for an escape. She inhaled sharply through her nose. "This has to be a joke." Harold simply shook his head. "Mrs. Hastings, the will is legally binding." Her head snapped up. "She wouldn't do this." "She did," I said, my voice calm. She turned to me, and there it was, full-blown panic, barely masked by a desperate attempt at control. "She wouldn't cut me out completely," she said, shaking her head, as if she could will the truth away. "She wouldn't do that to me." I just stared at her. Let her sit with it. Let her feel it. She tried again. "Even if she tried, I have a claim as your wife," she said, her voice sharpening as she latched onto legal jargon, scrambling for anything to hold on to. "A spouse is entitled to a portion of marital assets, Robert. You know this." "I'll contest the will." I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. No, you won't. Her eyes narrowed. You don't get to decide that. You're right, I said, my lips curving just slightly. But you already did. The air left her lungs in a short, unsteady breath. What the hell does that mean? I turned to Harold, giving him a slight nod. He sighed, flipping through the documents until he found the one I had been waiting for. He slid it across the table, tapping the top of the page. Vanessa hesitated before picking it up. She skimmed it quickly, and then, for the second time that day, her entire body went rigid. Her face drained of color. It was beautiful. This isn't real, she whispered. It's very real, Harold confirmed. The paper trembled in her hands. It was the proof. The final blow. My mother hadn't just changed her will, she had taken an extra step, a masterstroke in cutting Vanessa off completely. Vanessa had signed a spousal waiver 2 years ago, a legally binding document stating that she had no right to contest any of my mother's assets or my inheritance. She had signed it without thinking, without reading it carefully, because she had assumed she didn't need to. I had asked my mother why she had done it, why she had gone through the trouble of getting that document signed when, at the time, I had thought our marriage was stable. My mother had simply smiled and said, "A woman like her never plays fair. So why should I?" Vanessa's breathing was uneven now. "You tricked me," she whispered, looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "No," I said simply. "You underestimated me." She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. You think this means you win?" Her voice trembled with rage. "I still get half of everything in the divorce. You can't take that from me." Now it was my turn to smile. "I don't have to," I said. Harold, still as professional as ever, tapped another document. Vanessa's eyes flickered down, and when she saw what it was, her whole body locked up. It was the evidence, the proof of her affair. A timeline, photos, emails, bank statements showing her funneling our money into a secret account with Dominic. A legally airtight case for infidelity. Vanessa's breath came in short, uneven bursts. If I filed, she wouldn't just lose the inheritance. She'd lose everything. No alimony. No assets. Nothing. And that was when it finally happened. For the first time since I had met her, since the moment we had stood at that altar and she had smiled at me, vowing loyalty while already betraying me, Vanessa looked afraid. She had spent years building her escape plan, her perfect victory, and I had just burned it all to the ground. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in her life, she had no words. I leaned back, watching as realization crashed over her in waves. "Game over," I said, and I meant it. Vanessa's hands trembled as she clutched the documents, her knuckles white against the edges of the paper. The conference room, once a place of cold professionalism, now felt like a cage, closing in around her. She blinked rapidly, her brain scrambling for a way out, a loophole, something she could twist in her favor. But there was nothing. For the first time in her life, she had no leverage. She turned to Harold, eyes blazing with desperation. This isn't legal. It can't be legal. He's trying to screw me over. You can't let him get away with this." Harold didn't even flinch. He had dealt with every type of person in his long career, and I could tell Vanessa was just another case to him now, a predictable, panicked fraud trying to talk her way out of a losing hand. "The documents are perfectly legal," he said, his voice cool, detached. "Signed, notarized, and on record. There is no basis for contesting the will, nor is there any path for alimony or marital asset division under these circumstances." Vanessa inhaled sharply, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's not true. We've been married for over 10 years. That has to count for something. I gave up opportunities for this marriage. I deserve." She cut herself off when she saw the look on my face. Because she knew. She knew what I was about to say before I even opened my mouth. "You deserve nothing," I said quietly. Her lips pressed together, trembling. I could almost see the memories flashing behind her eyes, the years of carefully orchestrated lies, the fake affection, the slow financial siphoning behind my back. She had built an entire future on the belief that she could outplay me. Now, that future was nothing but dust in her hands. Her breath hitched, and she shook her head more forcefully, as if trying to will the situation into a different reality. No, no, I won't accept this. I won't let you just throw me away like this. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Like you threw me away? I leaned forward slightly, resting my arms on the table, watching her unravel. You didn't just leave me, Vanessa. You didn't just cheat. You built a whole second life behind my back. You planned to gut me for every cent you could before running off to your real family. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I didn't stop. I want you to sit here and really understand something, I continued, my voice low, deliberate. You thought you were in control. You thought you had me right where you wanted me, grieving, vulnerable, too broken to fight back. I tilted my head slightly. But here's the truth, Vanessa. You never had control. You were playing checkers while I was playing chess. A sharp exhale left her lips, her chest rising and falling rapidly. And then, the anger came. She shot up from her seat, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice shaking. You think you've won? You think you can just humiliate me like this and walk away? I stayed seated, my expression calm. That's exactly what I think. Her jaw clenched, her fists curling at her sides. I could see it, every instinct in her screaming to lash out, to fight, to twist this into something where she could still come out ahead. But there was nothing left for her to twist, nothing left for her to manipulate. And that was when I saw it. The realization settling in. The slow, creeping horror that for once in her life, she had well and truly lost. I stood, buttoning my jacket, and looked her dead in the eye. This is over, Vanessa. I gestured toward the door. You should leave before you embarrass yourself any further. She sucked in a sharp breath, nostrils flaring. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at me, might do something reckless, but then she grabbed her purse, shoved the documents off the table in a fit of frustration, and stormed out. The door slammed behind her, and just like that she was gone. I let out a slow breath, turning back to Harold, who had remained silent through the entire ordeal. He gave me a small nod of approval, gathering his papers. Well, he said, adjusting his glasses, I must say, I've rarely seen someone walk into their own execution so confidently. I let out a dry chuckle, shaking my head. She did it to herself. And she had. She had walked into this office expecting to leave with half of everything I had. Instead, she left with nothing. And I had never felt lighter. I stepped out of the lawyer's office feeling the crisp afternoon air hit my face. It felt different, lighter, cleaner, like I had been carrying a weight for years that had finally been ripped off my back. Vanessa was gone, and she had nothing. No inheritance, no claim, no legal foothold to latch on to. For years, she had carefully planned my downfall, constructing her escape with precision, but she had forgotten one crucial detail. I was not a man who left doors unlocked. I had seen too many legal battles in my career to allow myself to become a victim of one. I took my time walking to my car, my mind still processing the events of the last hour. I had won, not just in a legal sense, but in every way that mattered. And yet, there was something unfinished, something lingering in the back of my mind, like a final chess piece I had yet to move. Dominic. The man who had slithered into my marriage, who had whispered sweet lies into Vanessa's ear while she drained our accounts behind my back. The man who thought he was stepping into a comfortable, luxurious life with a woman who would bring him wealth and stability. He didn't know yet. Didn't know that his golden ticket had just turned to dust. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled out my phone. There it was. The number Vanessa didn't think I had. Dominic Myers. I had never contacted him before. Never confronted him. Never let on that I even knew who he was. He probably assumed I was an ignorant fool, a faceless husband whose money was being funneled into his lifestyle. I smiled as I hit dial. It rang. Once. Twice. Then a click. A voice on the other end. Hello. I could hear the casual arrogance in his tone, the voice of a man who thought he had nothing to fear. Dominic, I said, letting his name settle between us. There was a pause. Yeah. He sounded confused. Who's this? I let the silence stretch. just long enough for him to feel it. Then I spoke. "This is Robert Hastings." Silence. Complete. Utter. Silence. Then, a nervous laugh. "Oh, well. What can I do for you, Robert?" I could hear the slight edge of panic in his voice now. "Good. I thought I'd call," I said, keeping my tone light, conversational, "since I figured Vanessa hasn't updated you yet." "Updated me?" he echoed, trying to sound casual, but I could hear it now, the tightness in his throat, the barely concealed tension. "Yes," I said, "about how she just walked out of a lawyer's office with absolutely nothing." Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "You're lying," he said, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. I chuckled. "Am I?" A sharp exhale on the other end. She told me she was getting half. That she had a right to it. She was wrong," I cut in smoothly. "Turns out, my mother saw through her long before I did. Made sure she wouldn't get a penny. And you know what else?" I let the silence linger, let the words hit before I delivered the final blow. "She waived any claim to my assets too. No alimony. No settlement. Nothing." I could hear it now. The unraveling. The realization. Dominic had built his future on the assumption that Vanessa would come with wealth, security, comfort. And now? Now, she was just another broke, bitter woman with no backup plan. "Guess that means you're on your own," I added, my tone almost sympathetic. "Hope you weren't counting on her money to carry you." A sharp inhale. I could hear the shift in his breathing. He was panicking now. I don't know what you're talking about, man," he stammered. "This isn't my problem. Vanessa and I—" "Oh, come on, Dominic," I interrupted. "Don't do that. We both know you were riding on her getting a nice payout. But now," I smirked, "now, she's got nothing. And from what I hear, you don't either." Silence. I could almost feel him sweating through the phone. And then, like clockwork, a beep. The call disconnected. I stared at my phone for a moment before letting out a slow breath. There it was. The final piece. Dominic was already backing away, realizing too late that he had hitched his future to a sinking ship. He would run, just like I knew he would. Just like men like him always did when things stopped being easy. Vanessa would lose him next. She had thrown away everything for a fantasy, a delusion that she was in control. And now, she was alone, just like she had left me. I started my car, gripping the steering wheel as a sense of finality settled over me. Game over. For real this time. I pulled out of the parking lot, the weight of the past few months lifting off my shoulders like fog burning away in the morning sun. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Vanessa was finished. Dominic was already running. And me? I was free. But something told me the show wasn't quite over yet. I wasn't surprised when, not even an hour later, my phone started buzzing on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen at a red light. Vanessa. Of course. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. By the fourth call, my curiosity got the better of me. I smirked, pulling into my driveway before answering. "Hello, Vanessa." I expected rage. Screaming. Maybe even a pathetic attempt at negotiation. Instead, what I got was desperation. "Robert," she breathed, and for the first time in years, I heard something real in her voice. "We need to talk." I shut off my car and leaned back in the seat. "Do we?" A sharp exhale on the other end. "Please, don't be like this." I didn't know. I didn't know she changed the will. "That's funny," I said, tilting my head. "Because you seemed pretty damn sure you were getting half when you walked out on me." Silence. Then she tried a new tactic. The same one she had used 1,000 times before. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Dominic, I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh. "Let me guess. He's gone." More silence. That told me everything I needed to know. Dominic had cut and run the second he realized Vanessa wasn't his golden goose. And now, with no money, no backup plan, and no allies, she was left standing in the ruins of the empire she thought she was building. I made a mistake," she said finally, her voice trembling. I shut my eyes for a moment, letting the sheer absurdity of it all wash over me. The arrogance, the betrayal, the cruelty, now replaced with fear, regret, and loneliness. "Yeah," I said. "You did." She sniffed, and for a second, I thought she was crying. Maybe she was. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. Her voice cracked. "Can we meet? Please." I exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel. A few months ago, maybe even a few weeks ago, I would have hesitated. I would have felt something. Anger. Sadness. A sense of obligation. But not now. Now, all I felt was a quiet, cold satisfaction. "No, Vanessa," I said simply. "We have nothing left to talk about." She let out a shaky breath. "Robert, please. I don't have anywhere to go." I smiled. "That's not my problem." Then I hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone, waiting to see if she'd call back. She didn't. Because deep down, she knew. She had lost. For good this time. The silence after I hung up was almost deafening. For years, Vanessa had controlled every conversation, every argument, every situation to her advantage. She had always known how to twist words, how to manipulate emotions, how to make me feel guilty even when I had done nothing wrong. But now? Now, she had nothing left. I sat in my car for a moment longer, letting it all sink in. She was alone. Dominic had left her. Her fantasy life had crumbled before it had even begun. And now, she was realizing the one thing she had never considered possible: there was no backup plan. She thought she could waltz back into my life, that I'd be too weak, too soft to shut the door in her face. But I wasn't that man anymore. I got out of the car, walking up the driveway to my house. My house, not ours. Never again. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. But it was something close to relief. And then my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, expecting another desperate call from Vanessa. But it wasn't her. It was a text from an unknown number. "I think we should talk." I frowned, my pulse kicking up slightly. I tapped the message, and a second later, another text came through. "It's Dominic." I let out a sharp breath, my grip tightening around the phone. This was new. I hadn't expected him to reach out. I thought he'd cut his losses and disappear into whatever hole he crawled out of. But now? Now, he was the one initiating contact. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. About what? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his response came through. About Vanessa. A slow smirk curled at the corner of my lips. So, Dominic wasn't as smooth as he thought he was. I took my time before responding, letting him sit with his own nerves. Then, finally, I typed back. "Where and when?" His reply was almost instant. "Tonight. The Harbor Grill. 8 p.m. I chuckled, shaking my head. He wanted to meet in public. Smart. Probably thought I'd knock his teeth in if we met somewhere private. And maybe I would have, if I was still the man I had been before all of this. But I had a feeling this was going to be far more entertaining. I pocketed my phone, exhaling slowly. I had no idea what Dominic wanted. But I knew one thing for certain. This night was about to get interesting. The Harbor Grill was one of those mid-range, dimly lit restaurants where people went to talk business or break up quietly. I arrived a few minutes before 8, scanning the room until I spotted him. Dominic sat at a corner table, nursing a beer, his knee bouncing slightly. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. His usual smug, pretentious aura was gone, replaced by something I hadn't expected: worry. I took my time walking over, letting him see me, letting him feel the weight of the moment. He straightened as I pulled out the chair across from him, his eyes flicking up to meet mine. "Robert," he said, his voice tight. I gave him a slow nod. "Dominic." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The waitress came over, and I waved her off without looking away from him. I wanted to see him sweat. And he was sweating. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "So," I said, dragging the word out, "you wanted to talk." Dominic swallowed hard. "Yeah." I said nothing, just waited. He cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "Look, man, I didn't know about the will. I didn't know she was getting nothing. I raised an eyebrow. And he exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. And I wouldn't have. I mean, if I'd known, I wouldn't have, he trailed off, shaking his head. I tilted my head slightly. Wouldn't have what? Slept with my wife? Convinced her to leave me? Made plans for a future where you lived off my money? His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. He knew better. You think I care about your regret? I asked, my voice low, controlled. You think I care that you didn't know? I chuckled, shaking my head. You made your bed, Dominic. And now you get to lie in it. He exhaled sharply, leaning forward. That's the thing, Robert. I don't want to. I paused, narrowing my eyes. What? He glanced around, then lowered his voice. I want out. I stared at him, waiting for him to elaborate. He ran a hand through his hair. Vanessa, she's not who I thought she was, man. The second she realized she wasn't getting the money, she flipped. She's unhinged. She's been calling me nonstop, showing up at my place, screaming, crying, threatening to ruin my life. He shook his head, his hands clenching into fists. I thought she loved me. I really did. But she doesn't. She just needed a way out, and I was the idiot who gave her one. I let that sit for a moment. Dominic was realizing too late that he had never been Vanessa's endgame. He had been a stepping stone, a temporary thrill. And now that he wasn't useful to her, she was spiraling. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I leaned forward slightly. And what exactly do you want from me? He licked his lips, hesitating. I need you to make her stop. Now I did laugh. A short, sharp sound. Make her stop? Dominic, I'm not her handler. She's your problem now. He shook his head. No, see, that's the thing. She doesn't think so. She still thinks she can get something out of you. She's convinced you'll take her back. Or at least, that she can guilt you into giving her something. I went quiet, my fingers drumming against the table. I had expected Vanessa to be desperate, but this was pathetic. She's not my problem, I repeated. Dominic let out a hollow laugh. Maybe not, but she sure as hell thinks she is. I studied him for a long moment, considering my options. Then, finally, I leaned back, a slow smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. Well, I said, my voice casual. I guess it's time to show her just how wrong she is. Dominic let out a slow, shuddering breath, running a hand through his messy hair. He looked like a man on the verge of breaking, and for a brief second, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I reminded myself, he had done this to himself. He had crawled into bed with a woman who had spent years deceiving me, lying to my face, preparing to gut me for everything I had. He had played a part in my destruction, and now, he was here, begging me to save him from the very monster he helped create. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. So, let me get this straight, I said, my tone even. You stole my wife. You played a role in ruining my marriage. And now that she's turned on you, you want my help? He flinched at the bluntness of it. I didn't mean for this to happen, he muttered, his voice low. I thought he shook his head. I thought she loved me. I chuckled, shaking my head. No, Dominic. You thought you were special. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue, because he knew I was right. You were just another tool for her. I continued, my voice calm, measured. She used you the same way she used me. The same way she's probably used every man in her life. And now that she has nothing left, she's trying to latch onto the last piece of stability she can find. His fingers curled into fists against the table. I don't know what to do. I exhaled slowly, studying him. There was a certain poetic justice in all of this. Vanessa had bet everything on the wrong man, thinking Dominic was her safety net. But he wasn't strong enough to handle her. He had folded the moment things got difficult, and now, he was here, looking to me for a way out. There was only one way to end this. I pulled out my phone and, without hesitation, scrolled to Vanessa's number. Dominic's eyes widened. What are you doing? I smirked. What you should have done the second she started coming after you. Then, before he could say anything else, I hit dial. The phone rang once. Twice. Then, She answered. Robert. Vanessa breathed, her voice shifting instantly into something soft, desperate. I knew you'd call. Please, just let me. Shut up, Vanessa. I cut in, my tone sharp. I'm only saying this once, so listen carefully. A pause. Then, a shaky inhale. Robert, please, I know you've been harassing Dominic, I continued, ignoring her pathetic attempt at playing the victim. I know you've been showing up at his place, calling him nonstop, trying to manipulate him the same way you tried to manipulate me. Silence. Then, a low, bitter laugh. So he ran to you, she sneered. That's cute. I smirked. Oh, it's more than cute, Vanessa. It's pathetic. You lost, and now you're scrambling. But let me make something very clear. You are nothing to me. Nothing. I don't owe you a damn thing, and neither does Dominic. Robert. No, I snapped. You don't get to talk. You don't get to beg. You don't get to manipulate your way out of this. We're done. Another shaky inhale. I just need a little help. Just something to get back on my feet. I laughed. A sharp, cold sound. You left me, Vanessa. I reminded her. You walked out, thinking you were walking into a better life. But all you did was destroy yourself. And now? Now you're reaping what you sowed. A sharp, frustrated exhale. I made a mistake, okay? Her voice cracked. I messed up. But you don't have to be cruel, Robert. I went silent for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. Then, finally, I said, cruel? I shook my head. No, Vanessa. Cruel was what you did to me. This is justice. Silence. For the first time, she had no comeback. No clever manipulation. No fake tears that would work in her favor. She had nothing. Don't call me again, I said, my voice like steel. Don't call Dominic again. Don't show up at either of our doors. You made your bed, Vanessa. Now lie in it. Then, without another word, I hung up. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Dominic let out a slow breath, rubbing his face. Jesus. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and stood. Problem solved. He looked up at me, his eyes still wide with disbelief. That's it. I smirked. That's it. He shook his head. She's gonna hate you forever. I let out a short, dry laugh. Good. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant, never looking back. Vanessa was gone. Dominic was out of my life. And me? For the first time in years, I was finally free.